In tonight's episode, I'm going to tell you some terrifying accounts of hiking and camping stories in the deep woods. These are submitted to me by viewers just like you. Bryce is a 33-year-old man hailing from the Chicago suburbs and has been an avid outdoorsman ever since he was young. Him and his family have gone on hunting trips and multiple hiking trips, and he just enjoys everything outdoor related. And in fact, in the email, he always mentioned how they're always looking for new adventures in nature so they can make memories together as a family. This is when he went on to describe that even though he loves the outdoors and he has spent a ton of time in them, he has had two run-ins with a creature he cannot really describe. He has had two different run-ins with a creature that he refers to as dog people, and reiterates that while they were very similar looking, both encounters he had were different creatures at different locations and different times throughout his life. For the very first encounter, he's going to take us back to 1989 when he was just 12 years old. And this is when Bryce's father had taken him on his very first ever deer hunting trip. Now, he had taken him multiple times when he was younger, but kind of just as a tag-along situation and not to actually hunt alongside him. For whatever reason, Bryce's father seemed very wary of letting Bryce handle a firearm, and for some reason at 12 years old just seemed to be the magic number for his dad. Weird, I understand, but it is what it is. So Bryce describes him and his father out there in the deep woods, right by Lake Superior, almost right in the heart of the Chequamegon National Forest area. And at this time, Bryce and his father were staying at a cabin owned by one of his father's friends who would always let Bryce and his father use it during the hunting season every single year. In fact, I believe that Bryce's father and his friends would constantly be rotating who was staying in the cabins and who was not. There were apparently several stands within the area. It made the perfect place for mule deer hunting. Now, Bryce informed me that this was later October, and if you're from Michigan or the Midwest, you know how bitter cold the fall can get. So while he was crashing out on the couch near the stove and his father was taking up the bedroom, Bryce remembers being very, very tired and falling asleep right there. But then right around 1:30 in the morning, gets up because he has to go use the bathroom. But his father had awoken too and even stopped Bryce to ask him about the moving around he had heard outside, which he had assumed was Bryce. So he asked him if everything is okay, to which Bryce was confused why his father was asking him these questions. Bryce's father seemed very unnerved and concerned about something going on that Bryce wasn't too sure about. Then, Bryce's father very quickly escorted Bryce to the bedroom and had him crouch down, while Bryce's father kept going over to the windows, looking out nervously, as if expecting someone or something to be out there. Bryce, having no understanding of what was going on, kept asking his father, "Dad, what's going on? What's wrong?" To which Bryce's dad would simply just tell him, "Shh, there's something out there." And this is the moment that Bryce grew gravely concerned, because his dad was a very experienced outdoorsman and never acted like this ever before. But his dad was so intent on looking out the window at something, and he was watching his dad's eyes from the corner of the room, and he could see the worry growing across his father's face. Bryce then looked down and made a notice that his dad even had his weapon in his hands, as if ready for something or an intruder to break in. Now, in this very moment, Bryce was suspecting that there was another hunter out there, possibly trying to break into the cabin or wanting to hurt Bryce and his father, and decided to not ask his dad any more questions, but to sit there and stay quiet. After about 20 or so minutes of this going on, Bryce's dad simply grabbed Bryce, took him out to the main living room area, and sat with him on the couch until he fell back asleep. And in the morning, when Bryce had awoke, his dad had looked like he had barely slept and was very uncomfortable looking, like he was paranoid and expecting something to happen. As that day had progressed, Bryce was most inquisitive with his father about finding what had happened last night, still assuming that it was another hunter who had wanted to break into the cabin and do harm to Bryce and his father. Bryce's father remained quiet about it until finally later on that same evening, until after they were already departing out of the Chequamegon forest, when Bryce's father pulled Bryce aside and explained to him, "I didn't want to scare you last night, but son, this is exactly what happened." As Bryce recalls it, Bryce's father had been awakened in the middle of the night by a loud banging sound, and Bryce's father described this tall, upright timber wolf trying to find its way into the cabin, all while watching Bryce sleep in the living room. Fearing for his son's life, he goes out into the living room, where Bryce is now awakened because he has to use the bathroom, and whatever it is outside now moves towards the back of the cabin, where it's still trying to find a way in. And this is exactly where Bryce's father had closely watched it as it went around the perimeter of the cabin. Bryce reiterated to me over and over in the email that his father was terrified as he was telling Bryce this, and that the word Dogman was never used, and at that age he had somehow not heard of the legend of the Michigan Dogman. In his 12-year-old mind, he was convinced it was some sort of dog peep, and that's all that became of that particular encounter. Although Bryce was frightened by the experience, he didn't actually see it firsthand, and it was more just a general experience between him and his father. Bryce's second encounter happened almost 20 years later to the T, when he is now 32 years old in 2009. So after fast forwarding in time, Bryce is now married and camping up near the Chequamegon National Forest. Bryce did not give me an exact location, but told me it was around the general area. After waking up one morning to a beautiful ray of sunshine smacking them both in the face, Bryce and his wife, they decided that after breakfast, it would be a perfect time to go on a long hike. So after cooking up breakfast and getting all ready, amped up with coffee, Bryce, his wife, and his 2 kids set out on a nearby trail to go enjoying the northern woods. Now, Bryce informed me that after about 45 or so minutes on this trail, his wife began to physically grow uncomfortable, telling Bryce that she swears she hears something following behind them in the woods, but thought it was maybe just a large animal. But as time progressed more and more, she became more and more nervous, saying that someone or something is definitely following them, and who or whatever it was intelligent enough to stay within the confines of the tree line and the brush to make sure as to not be seen. Bryce immediately got nervous and decided to keep his 2 little ones right in front of him and his wife. As Bryce and his family kept progressing on down the trail, he made note of how the trail had some dips and ups and twists and turns, and it was at one portion where him and his wife stopped because they had started to hear some unidentifiable growling sounds off to his left, maybe about 15 or 20 feet in the woodline directly to his 9 o'clock. He instantly went on to explain to me that this wasn't a bear because you can just hear by the tonal quality of the growling that whatever it was just large and had a massive set of lungs, and that it scared Bryce and his wife deeply, with his 2 children unsure of how to react to this. Bryce immediately got the impression that he was dealing with a large predator of some kind, although in that moment he wasn't sure exactly what. In that moment, Bryce and his wife noticed movement off to the right from something really big running now directly to their 12 o'clock, but just enough off in the tree line where they could not see what it was. And this is when Bryce explains to me he really began to panic, because he explained that he could hear that it was huge and very heavy, but the most terrifying is that whatever it was bipedal. Bryce and his wife and children were standing there in the middle of the trail, 45 minutes away from their tent, petrified, unsure of what to do next, because if they were to turn around and run, that's just signaling for any predator to give chase. And so Bryce and his wife begin to grab onto their children and slowly back away step by step to try and get across the bend directly behind them, so they would at least have some bit of coverage to start running. And in this moment, as Bryce and his wife are slowly backing up away from whatever it was now in the trees near them, because Bryce and his wife could tell that there were multiples of whatever this was, Bryce goes on to tell me that a head slowly began to push its way out of the thicket right in front of him. And he detailed in his email that this was by far the most nightmarish experience in his life, and was like living a real-life horror movie. The head that slowly pushed its way out of the thicket, he said, reminded him of the scene in Jurassic Park right before the guy gets mauled by a raptor. And you may remember it because he says, "Clever girl," and immediately gets mauled. That's exactly what was running through Bryce's mind in that very moment. But he went on to describe to me in detail the massive head that began to emerge from the thicket in front of him, and described it as the largest, most frightening wolf head he has ever seen. I'm actually going to go ahead and show you a picture right here real quick. And even though this is a artist rendition, I showed him this picture and he immediately got chills and told me that the head on this picture, the face that you're looking at, is almost spot on. The same beady yellow eyes, the teeth, the snout, and the way the face looks are all on point. He explained that the only difference here is just the head size, and that the head he was looking at was this, but just much larger. He explained that as this head emerged from the thicket, it looked around and looked directly at Bryce's eyes and looked him him directly in the eyes. Its mouth at this very moment was closed, but began to slowly pull back its lips, revealing teeth that looked exactly like this. Instantly, his wife and kids began screaming bloody murder, and all three of them took off running directly behind Bryce. And now this thing staring at Bryce instantly turns its attention to his wife and kids, which are now running, and Bryce is freaking out because now he's thinking that this thing has signaled his kids and wife as prey. Without thinking and just reacting to the situation, Bryce turns around and runs after his wife. Bryce went on to describe that the entire time he's chasing after his wife and kids and getting up to them, he can hear movement beside him on both sides of the tree line and behind him. He knew that whatever creatures he was dealing with, there was definitely more than one. He also knew the stakes were high, and if he did not get back to his tent, him and his family would not survive. And this is where he admits he was confused because somehow, even though these beings, whatever they were, had full power to catch up to him and rip him to shreds, they never did. It's almost like they let his family escape purposefully, but continuously trailed his family the entire way they made back to their tent. As soon as Bryce and his wife and kids had made it back to the tent, they didn't even bother grabbing any of their supplies. They immediately got his keys and the essentials and ran back to the truck, which was probably about a good 200 yards away from where their tent was. Bryce gets up to the truck, throws everyone in, gets in the truck, and as he's turning the key and starts to pull away, he looks back one final time in the direction of where his tent was and swears that he could see these two massive black wolves standing there looking directly in his direction. He didn't mention anything about these wolves being on two legs or anything, but just explained that they looked like two massive sized timber wolves that were completely pitch black and had yellow eyes. Not glowing or anything, just very stark yellow eyes. And Bryce explained to me that this event has traumatized his wife and children and Bryce, and they really don't go camping as a family at all anymore. Even though it's a passion and love that Bryce grew up knowing, after this particular event, it's done it for him. After spending some time personally talking to Bryce and emailing back and forth, while he didn't have any pictures or phone cameras with him at this time, he explained that the nightmares and trauma that he acquired from this event will stay with him forever, and even ponders if it was these same creatures that were following him outside of his cabin all the way back in '89 when he was 12. In conversations back and forth, I've asked him if he believes it was the Michigan Dogman, and he's unsure, but tells me that whatever he looked at, when he made eye contact with whatever that thing was, it was like looking at something from hell, and that there is no words in the English language to describe the level of primal fear that he felt throughout his entire body. During our conversations, I had a really hard time getting him to talk more and more about it due to the level of trauma that I could tell this event caused him. So after a few emails, I decided to call it quits. And in his last email, he explained that even though that day, and even though the sun was shining and it was a beautiful day, he thought it was very weird how the forest that morning was completely silent, but decided to brush it off and not tell his wife because he didn't want her to be paranoid and just wanted to still enjoy the day. And as the events unfolded from that morning, he truly believes that something out there, a large dog-like creature, was hunting him and his family. A woman by the name of Lisa had reached out to me, and she claims she's about 61 years old and has been an avid reader of the cryptozoology and paranormal world for quite some time now. She had reached out to me because she wanted to detail an experience that she had had when she was younger that had left her with a sense of wonder. Lisa described herself as adventurous and ambitious, growing up in the Ozarks in Missouri, right where this incident took place. Now, her father actually owned around 500 acres where she spent many summers out camping in the back portion of the property, playing on the tire swing, doing all sorts of outside recreational activity. Beaver Lake apparently wasn't all too many miles away from where she was, and in the back portion of her father's property, there were many small rivers and streams that would actually eventually feed into Beaver Lake. And in fact, many summers, her and her brothers would be out there in the streams, out on the back portion of her father's property, fishing for crawdads and playing like what little kids do. For this particular story, she was roughly about 2 miles away from the nearest neighbor's house and claimed that at this time it was very, very remote. So this experience happened when she was about 15 or 16, and at this time it was right in the middle of the 70s. Her father and mother would separate when she was little, and she primarily lived with her father during May through September and would leave his house to go back to her mom's in a different state for the school year from September to around May. Now, she explained that if you go far enough back into the property, her and her brothers had built this large makeshift fire pit and kind of made a custom campground, as she explained it. Large patches of dirt next to the stream where there was a lot of roughhousing and playing, and they would set up their tents and cook hot dogs over the fire. And so one evening she's out there with her brothers, and they're sitting there joking around, just cooking hot dogs over a fire. And after some time, they all decide to retire to the tent. Lisa didn't have a way to tell what time it was because she was not wearing a watch or did not have any way to know exactly the time, but she explained that because it was summertime, it didn't get dark till around 9 or 10 p.m. So everybody was tired, everybody gets in the tent, and her brothers start snoring. They're pretty tired, but Lisa did not fall asleep so easily. She was wired from the adventures of the day and could not fall asleep, even after she could hear the relaxing cricket noises and the crackling embers of the fire. So she explained that after laying there for maybe a good 20 minutes, she decided to get up and go sit by the creek, which was only about 40 feet away from her tent. And even though it was dark, she explained there was enough clear skies and starlight to illuminate enough around her that she could kind of at least see where the creek was. And so she walked out of the tent, slowly zipping it up to not disturb her sleeping brothers, walks over to the creek, sits down, and just sits there and takes in the wonderful scenic night. And the night around her is completely idyllic and peaceful, and she's just sitting there watching the moonlight glisten off the waters of the stream in front of her. She is at her happy place, she described. Now, as she's sitting there, enjoying the night around her, she begins to notice a funny feeling. What she described then was the feeling of being watched. And immediately, she kind of starts to look around and react to this feeling because she thought maybe her dad had snuck out here and was going to yell at her or something, and that maybe he was working his way to come to her. But as she turned around, she didn't see him coming up over the hill, and as she's looking around, her eyes noticed something unusual. Up in the trees, maybe about 50 feet above where she's at, is a large, hunched-over figure that at what she first thought was an owl. But as she began to squint her eyes and adjust more and focus and study what the shape was, she noticed the shape was all wrong. And she adamantly stated over and over in her email that at first she thought it was an owl, and then it went to thinking that that's an abnormally large owl. Why is it so big? To that's definitely not the shape of an owl. And this was all going on in her mind, just churning and churning as she's trying to study what this is. And this was maybe over the span of 5 to 10 seconds when this thing turned its head and looked down directly at Lisa. Now, she described it as this large black silhouette, but she described its eyes as being these really large ovals that were this pulsating yellow and white, as she described it. And where the position of the moon was in the sky, there wasn't too much light to see all the necessary details, but she said she saw a pretty good silhouette of what this thing was, and it reminded her of one of those ancient Gothic gargoyles crouched down, sitting there, looking down at her. And while as I'm reading this, I could easily dismiss this off as she definitely saw an owl and just misidentified it. She went on to describe the actual weight of the tree bending over, as the weight of whatever this was perched on top of the tree was actually causing the tree to bend further and further down under its heavy weight. And she remembers hearing the cracks and snapping of the wood as it began to go more and more down. She said that this thing was only perched up there for maybe no more than 20 seconds before it sunk further and further down as the tree gave way to the weight of this thing, but before it spread its wings and took off into the night. Now, she wrote to me in detail that as soon as this thing flung its wings out, she said it was huge, and the wings were just like an incredibly large bat. And as soon as it shone its wings, it leapt up into the sky and took off. She claims that she had never seen anything move so quickly through the night sky, not like this. And it really makes you wonder, did she see a real-life gargoyle, or was this simply a misidentification? But then how do you explain the details of whatever this was weighing down the top of the tree, to the point to where whatever this was forced to spread its wings and fly off, for otherwise it would have fell off? What flies around the woods at night in Missouri that is that large and heavy that a tree cannot withstand the weight? I had tried to ask Lisa any size or weight estimates, and she claimed that due to the distance and where it was in the lighting, and the fact that it was crouched the entire time like this, she estimated it to be easily bigger than her dad, and that the wings were a massive, right around probably 16 or so feet wingspan. And she just kept reiterating the same thing, that it looked like a gargoyle from what she could see. And so I had asked her through a series of emails, did she feel fear? Did she smell sulfur? Did she ever feel threatened or that her life was in danger? And her response was that the whole experience, as she stated in the beginning of her email, left her with a sense of wonder, And although she was kind of scared just from experiencing something so out of the norm, she wasn't terrified to the point where she would run away, but more curious as to what she had saw, because even at 15 years old, she realized this was not something normal she had witnessed. But she never told her brothers or her dad because they simply wouldn't believe her. In fact, they probably would have made fun of her and teased her. And so this was something she kept to herself until she ended up marrying her first husband in '99. And it turns out he was actually a very active paranormal researcher, to which Lisa told him her experience from when she was younger, and he believes that it was some sort of bat humanoid or possibly a bat squatch. While Lisa didn't exactly tell me what she believed, she made it clear through her dialogue with me that she wasn't satisfied with that answer and wanted to know more. So I'd love to leave that up to you guys. You let me know what you think. Personally, it's hard to say, but the possibility of a misidentification is always very possible with these things, and you do have to take them with a grain of salt. But there is a possibility of a mystery of something being out there that we can't quite explain, since the Ozarks are full of strange legends and accounts of stories that not only go back to the native tribes, but even things of modern day of strange supernatural sightings and encounters. And with that in mind, it's very possible she did encounter or see something beyond the norm. Let me know what your opinion is on it in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to go ahead and smack that like button. If you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and hit the subscribe button and keep your notifications turned on, so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a new video. And if you're wanting to get a snazzy cool new jersey just like this one, you can go ahead and check out the website below in my description at DIYOJ.com, where you can get any custom sports jersey made for you, and you could use the WLB 2022 discount code to get 10% off any jersey you order. As always guys, I love y'all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the next video.